Okay, think about this. You've got this fragile peace in one place, Yemen, after years of war. And it's suddenly shaking because of fighting hundreds of miles away.
Right.
And at the same time, there are these really tense talks happening with Iran about its nuclear program, hanging by a thread.
Exactly. Yemen and Iran, they seem separate, but they're absolutely tangled up in this bigger picture of global politics, you know?
Yeah, and that tangle, that interconnectedness, that's what we want to unpack today.
We've got some great sources to help us do that. We're looking at news reports from RAND and AP, which give us that on-the-ground feel.
Okay.
Then there's analysis from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, really digging into the nuclear side of things.
Wow.
Plus, a look at negotiation theory itself from MIT Press Direct, and even a little snippet from Reddit to see what people are saying.
So the mission for you listening is to, well, navigate this with us. I want to give you a clear picture of what's happening with the Yemen truce, why it's so precarious, and the complexities around the Iran nuclear talks. And maybe most importantly, the negotiation tactics underneath it all.
Yeah, understand the dynamics at play.
Exactly. So by the end, you'll hopefully have a better grasp of the risks, the potential for things to escalate, but also how diplomacy is trying to find a path to stability.
Okay, let's dive in. Yemen first.
Yeah, let's start there. The situation had seemed, well, hopeful for a bit, right?
It did. That truce, the one negotiated back in April 2022, it really brought a change after almost 10 years of war. We saw, according to RAND, a huge drop in violence, like an 85% drop in fatalities in just the first couple of months.
85%. That's incredible. And it wasn't just fewer casualties, right? There were other positive signs.
Absolutely. For a while, no cross-border attacks. Commercial ships could finally dock at Hodeida port again.
Yeah.
And crucially, commercial flights started up again from Sanaa Airport. Think about what that means for aid, for families.
Huge difference. A real lifeline.
Definitely. Now, RAND is clear. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a full peace deal. The humanitarian crisis was still, horrific. The economy shattered.
Oh, yeah.
But still, after 9 years, it felt like the best chance they'd had for actual dialogue.
But, and here's the but, things got complicated again. That interconnectedness we mentioned. The Gaza conflict starting last October 7th really threw a wrench in the works.
It really did. Because the Houthis decided to act, showing support for the Palestinians.
How did they act?
Well, they identify as part of Iran's axis of resistance, so they escalated big time. We saw missiles, drones fired towards Israel. Now, a lot of those were intercepted by Israel, the U.S., even Saudi Arabia reportedly.
Yeah.
But maybe even more worrying for, global trade and stability were the attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea.
Yeah, that sounds serious.
It is. It shows how a group like the Houthis can leverage a regional fight to disrupt things globally. It's kind of a shift in how these things work.
So specific incidents. Didn't they seize a ship?
They did. Back in November, a ship operated by a Japanese company, they claimed it had Israeli links.
Wow.
And then early December, the U.S. Navy destroyer, the Carney, had to shoot down drones. It was responding to attacks on 3 different commercial vessels.
3 ships, so this isn't isolated.
Not at all. And the Houthis basically put out a warning. Any ship heading to Israel is a target, unless it's carrying humanitarian aid.
Okay, so the immediate security threat is obvious. But what are the wider consequences of these attacks, especially for Yemen itself?
Well, several things. One, the risk of the whole region getting pulled into a wider conflict goes way up.
Right.
2, you see more U.S. warships in the area, which is a major shipping lane. And 3, almost certainly higher food costs in Yemen, which is devastating for a country already facing, just a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. It's a terrible irony.
It really is. So what's the way forward then? It seems like a bind. The Houthis are clearly causing problems, but RAND suggests there isn't really a clear alternative group ready to govern northern Yemen.
Exactly, and trying for a purely military solution. After almost a decade of fighting, that just doesn't seem realistic.
So what can the U.S. and its allies actually do? Retaliation sounds risky.
Very risky. There's a real danger of making things even worse. Apparently, even Saudi Arabia has been urging restraint.
Okay. What about labeling them terrorists again, the FTO designation?
Well, the Biden administration actually reversed that designation precisely because it choked off vital humanitarian aid getting to ordinary Yemenis. So doing it again would likely have the same terrible impact.
So military action is risky. The terrorist label hurts civilians. it seems like diplomacy is maybe the only viable path left.
It looks like the most constructive option, yeah. Randy kind of outlines a two-track approach. Some deterrence, maybe like a naval task force to escort ships, combined with diplomatic carrots. The idea being maybe the Houthis, even acting like this, might respond to potential incentives like international recognition down the line.
It's interesting, though. You mentioned reports that the Houthis and the Saudis might actually be close to some kind of deal themselves.
Yeah, there are whispers of that, which would be a positive step, obviously. But it's complicated, these external attacks targeting ships and Israel. Paradoxically, that could actually strengthen the Houthis back home, rally support, quashes internal dissent, you know?
Wow. So attacking outwards helps them consolidate power inwards?
That's it.
So Bessing.
It's a really precarious moment, like that Rand analysis title says. The truce was holding on, but it's under immense strain.
Okay, let's shift gears then to the other major point of tension.
Yeah.
Iran and the nuclear deal negotiations. What's the absolute core issue there?
Fundamentally, it boils down to this. Iran says it wants uranium enrichment for peaceful nuclear power.
Right, for energy.
But the U.S. and others have a clear red line. Iran cannot get a nuclear bomb, ever. And the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists piece really dives into how a new deal might try to bridge that gap.
And a big sticking point with the original 2015 deal, the JCPOA, was those sunset clauses, right?
Yeah.
Limits that expired over time.
Exactly. Those were a major reason the U.S. pulled out. The argument was that they eventually allowed Iran's program to expand too much.
So for any new deal to work, verification has to be absolutely central and long-lasting.
Absolutely critical. The Bulletin argues really strongly that robust verification measures are key, and crucially, these measures cannot have sunset clauses. They need to be permanent.
Permanent verification. Okay. So what does that actually look like? What kind of tech are we talking about?
Well, it gets pretty technical, which is fascinating. They're talking about real-time sensors, things that could detect even partially enriched uranium going into centrifuges.
Why is that specific point so important?
Because partially enriched uranium is the step right before weapons grade. It's the quickest path to bomb material, so catching it early is vital.
Got it.
They also talk about things like robotic neutron detectors, secure cameras for constant inspection, stuff that would supplement what the IAEA inspectors do on the ground. Okay.
And it wouldn't just be the enrichment sites. It would need to cover the whole supply chain where the uranium comes from, where the centrifuge parts are made.
So it's a really comprehensive monitoring system being proposed.
That's the idea. It sounds promising, but of course it depends on the tech working perfectly and Iran agreeing to that level of access.
And the trade-off would be what? If Iran agrees to this super strict permanent verification.
Well, the U.S. and others could gain very high confidence that they'd know immediately if Iran did try to make a dash for a bomb. It acts as a powerful deterrent.
And Iran gets?
Iran could potentially get acceptance for having as much low-enriched uranium and enrichment capacity as it genuinely needs for its stated peaceful program.
So both sides potentially get their core needs met.
That's the potential framework, yes. And the Bulletin even suggests these kinds of advanced verification techniques could maybe be a model for other countries developing nuclear power too. Could be good for non-proliferation globally. Interesting potential ripple effect. But coming back to the present, progress seems stalled again, doesn't it? You mentioned that Reddit post saying talks were postponed.
Yeah, indefinitely was the word used, which doesn't sound too promising right now.
No.
And that same thread had that, well, speculative idea that maybe Iran had leaned on the Houthis to cool things off for a bit, to try and build some goodwill for the nuclear talks.
So another potential link between Yemen and the Iran deal, even if it's just speculation.
It highlights how interconnected these things might be behind the scenes, yeah.
And AP News also reported Iran issuing a warning, didn't they?
Yeah.
About possibly kicking out inspectors.
They did, warning they might stop cooperating with the IAEA if the U.S. keeps making threats. It just shows how tense and fragile the whole situation is.
Definitely high stakes.
Mm-hmm.
And amid all this, AP highlighted the role of Oman, right? As a kind of go-between.
Absolutely crucial. Oman has often been the place where these sensitive U.S.-Iran talks happen. Their history, their location, their population mix, it gives them a unique ability to act as a bridge.
AP used that term Oman balancing.
Yeah.
What exactly is that? Is it just being neutral? What makes them so effective?
It's more than just neutrality. It's this long tradition they have of quiet, behind-the-scenes diplomacy. It comes from their history as a seafaring nation, always having to navigate tricky regional relationships.
Okay.
So they prioritize dialogue, de-escalation. They aren't seen as aligned with one side or the other in major conflicts, so powers trust them as a neutral venue.
Right.
They can host talks away from the public eye, which is vital for sensitive stuff like this. Their reputation for impartiality and just keeping lines of communication open makes them really effective where others might struggle.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've looked at the specifics in Yemen, the specifics with Iran. Let's pull back a bit now and look at that negotiation theory from MIT Press Direct.
Yeah.
How does theory help us understand these real-world messes?
Well, theory gives us a framework, right? It breaks down the basic choices negotiators always face. Do you accept the deal on the table? Do you walk away? Or do you keep talking?
Okay, accept, break off, or continue.
And if you continue, do you offer more? Or do you wait for the other side to move?
And those decisions aren't random. They're based on weighing costs and benefits, right?
Exactly. It's based on how you see your alternatives, what happens if you don't get a deal. That's your BTNA.
BTNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. I remember that one.
Yep. And your BATNA, or how you perceive your BATNA, is critical. It really shapes your bargaining power. If you have a strong alternative, you can push harder in the negotiation.
Makes sense. Your walkaway option gives you leverage.
Precisely. The MIT source really emphasizes that. Power isn't just about military might or money. It's about how good your options are outside the talks.
The theory also talked about negotiations not being smooth, linear processes, right? More like fits and starts.
Yeah, that's very common. Often you get these long periods where nothing seems to be happening, just deadlock. And then suddenly there's a burst of activity, a surge of progress.
What triggers those surges?
Often what the theory calls action-forcing events.
Action-forcing events. Okay, what are those? Are there examples we can see coming up in the Yemen or Iran situations, like maybe an aid deadline in Yemen or an IAEA report?
Good examples. An action-forcing event is basically a point in time, a deadline, or some kind of external shock that forces the negotiators to make hard choices. If they don't act, there are real costs.
Okay.
It could be a mediator setting a deadline, like you said, or it could be internal, maybe a shift in politics back home for one side. So yeah, an expiring aid agreement in Yemen could force a decision.
Yeah.
Or a really critical IAEA report on Iran could definitely be an action-forcing event, increasing pressure.
And negotiators can actually try to create these events, or at least create the feeling of pressure, right, to gain an advantage.
Oh, absolutely. It's a key tactic. Making the other side feel like time is running out for them. That delay hurts them more.
Oh, they do that. Just stalling.
That's one way. Or you might try to actively improve your own BATNA while making the other side's alternatives look worse. It's all about shaping perceptions of those time-related costs.
And setting deadlines is a classic way to try to force action, especially if you think the other side feels more time pressure than you do.
Exactly. And another tactic the theory mentions is using linkages. Tying progress in one negotiation to progress in another, seemingly separate one.
Ah, so connecting Yemen to the Iran deal, for instance, or vice versa.
Potentially, yeah. You could use it to force action. We won't move on X until you concede on Y, or to delay things. We can't finalize X until Y is sorted out. It becomes this intricate game.
So a key skill for negotiators is reading the situation, understanding not just their own pressures and alternatives, but the other side's too, and figuring out which deadlines are real.
That's a huge part of it. Being skeptical about deadlines, understanding what really makes them binding, and what the actual costs are if they're missed.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, we have this incredibly complex picture. Yemen's truce is fragile, directly hit by the fallout from Gaza. The Iran nuclear deal talks are stuck on these huge verification challenges, haunted by the old sunset clauses. And weaving through both situations are these negotiation dynamics, managing time pressure, BATNAs, action-forcing events. It's all constantly in play.
Exactly. It really shows how local fights can blow up regionally, even globally. And it underlines that, diplomacy, even when it's slow and frustrating, is probably still the main tool we have for trying to de-escalate things and find some stability in these really volatile places.
So a final thought for you listening. When you look at all this interconnectedness, all these challenges, what single thing do you think is most critical for lasting stability in the Middle East? Is it getting the current conflicts under control? Is it solving the Iran nuclear puzzle? Or does it need a more fundamental shift in how countries in the region talk to each other?
And think about the role players like Oman have, that quiet diplomacy, and the weight of decisions right now, acting versus waiting. What are the long-term consequences?
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about. We hope this deep dive gave you some useful perspectives on these incredibly important issues.